and welcome everyone to the Scaling Data Rights session here at SPOKES. Let's see the answer to the poll. Can we bring up the answer? Okay. Would you use an application that could do bulk DSAR requests on your behalf? If the answer is yes, those of you answered yes and tell me more, you've come to the right session, because that's actually what we're going to talk about today. Laws like CCPA create a new class of data rights, but they're hard for consumers to use. Consumer Reports is focused on making sure consumers everywhere can control their data. And so today I'd like to welcome two people from Consumer Reports. First of all, I'd like to welcome Ginny Foz, who's the Associate Director, Product R&D at the Digital Lab. Welcome, Ginny. And also I'd like to introduce you to Daza Greenwood, Internet Protocol Consultant from Consumer Reports. Welcome, Daza. So let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. Let's start with you, Ginny.
Absolutely, and thanks, Judy, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Ginny Foz, and I lead product and R&D at the Digital Lab at Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports is an 85-year-old nonprofit working in consumer protection, and the Digital Lab is a pretty new division. We just spun up within the past 2 years, and we're focused on uncovering the harms of technologies and also helping consumers solve them. In particular, we've decided to start out by focusing on data rights, and we really want to make sure that consumers have the ability to use data rights that already exist for them under the law. So today we're going to get to speak about a few different projects that we have spinning in that vein, but I'd like Daza, my colleague, to introduce himself as well.
Thanks so much, Ginny. Hi, I'm Daza Greenwood, and I am a Consumer Reports Internet Protocol Consultant in the Digital Lab with Ginny. And my focus there, as we'll talk about a little later in this program, is the data rights protocol. My background is as a technology lawyer and a government lawyer and a technologist before that. And I spend some of my time in a lab at MIT running the computational law program there. But most of my time is creating consortia of companies to develop and deploy protocols. And that's what brings me onto the Consumer Reports team and onto this panel today. So back to you.
Great, thank you. So before we get to the solutions that Consumer Reports is developing, let's start. Can you tell us the problem? So what was the problem that Consumer Reports identified that started the team looking for a solution?
Yeah, for sure. So Consumer Reports advocated for the CCPA for a long time and ended up being one of the parties who was instrumental in getting the CCPA passed. We saw it as a really important law for consumers to expand and enhance their digital rights. And then so after the CCPA passed, June of 2020, so mid last year, we decided to do a research project where we said, hey, it's so great that consumers have data rights under the law right now. Let's see how it is for them to use these data rights. And so we ran a big study. We recruited 593 consumers in California, and we coached them on how to submit a data rights request to a variety of different companies. And what we found in that process is that it was really tough for consumers to submit these requests. On average, it took consumers about 5 minutes to send a request to a company, but 52% of the time, the consumer was dissatisfied with the process. A lot of the requests weren't even successful. And also, if you extrapolate that out, right, if you think about 5 minutes per company, and then just think about the number of companies any consumer is likely interacting with, very quickly it gets to being one full-time work week of work in order to actively manage your data with the various companies that have it. And that's just impractical, and is going to lead to a world where consumers really aren't using these rights that we fought so hard for and that are so important for having better control over our digital lives. So it's been in that spirit of recognizing just the disconnect between the law existing and a consumer's practical ability to use it that we have set off working on an array of projects, two of which we'll highlight today. One of them relates to being an authorized agent, which means being a party who's able to submit data requests for consumers. And then a second is related to this data rights protocol, which is about standardizing the request and the responses and exchange of requests between consumers and companies.
Okay, great. We were talking about this earlier, that we had a behavioral scientist on first thing this morning, and he talked about how the process as it's designed today is just really, just reinforcing what you're saying, Ginny, that it's just not meant to be easy for consumers, not meant, it's making it difficult for consumers to want to exercise their rights. So it's really exciting that you're working on this project. All right, so let's talk about what you're doing to identify these challenges. Daza, do you want to start?
Yes, thanks. I'd be happy to. Well, I think some of the challenges are well understood and were just discussed in terms of, but just to maybe use an analogy, imagine that we had a legislative rule that granted all people a right to browse the web, and yet there was no such thing as HTTP or HTML. Well, HTTP, let's stick with that one for the moment, because that's a closer analog. In a sense, we're kind of like in that situation today when it comes to data rights, such as the rights of CCPA and other statutes and GDPR to have data deleted, to request access to data. In the case of CCPA, do not sell. So we've got these rights, and then Ginny and the Consumer Reports Digital Lab team has done extraordinary work in detail identifying the idiosyncratic, highly irregular, very manual ways that companies have largely made available to comply with the law. There are terrific opportunities that are being taken by companies, I think, like Wirewheel and others, to make that process more legible and more just more achievable in a sense for companies to have to comply and usable for consumers. And yet there's still, I would say, a challenge is there's a gap when you look at the idea of these rights being, in a sense, universal under law. And so we think, we're postulating that a kind of a specification, a technical specification, could be helpful at this point in development of the marketplace for companies that are providing solutions and that are required to comply with the law, and for consumers who just want to be able to exercise their rights. And so that is, I think, some of the shape of the challenge for which something like a data rights protocol might be a good solution type. So we can talk a little more about that later, but I think I've done my best to describe the shape of the challenge based on your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So the hypothesis here, right, is that if there was a more standard way to exchange data requests between consumers and companies, then it would be way easier for consumers to manage their data. And it would also be easier, cheaper, faster, more consistent for companies to process them. And so this data rights protocol that Daza mentioned is an open source project and a consortium that Consumer Reports is building that seeks to define a technical specification or a technical standard for the exchange of these data rights requests. Separately, we're working on another project that gets at kind of a different angle of the solution. And that is, we want to create an interface that makes it very, very easy for consumers who want to manage their data to do so. And so we're building a mobile app. The mobile app utilizes this authorized agent provision of the CCPA, specifying that an agent can represent the consumer's data desires to companies and can take data action for consumers. So in tandem or in parallel to developing this data rights protocol, we're also working on our own authorized agent where we, Consumer Reports, will be representing consumers and making sure that their opinions on how their data is managed get translated into action with the companies they do business with.
Here. And actually, could I stick one more little bit of answer,
course.
Judy? Thanks, sorry. But it's so relevant. So what Ginny just described is this role that she mentioned of an authorized agent, which is actually encoded in the CCPA, and it's the role of a company that operates on behalf of consumers, and that should make it possible through apps and services for them to exercise their rights in a more kind of coherent, simple to use, kind of way, just as she said. So then where that fits in the broader picture is you've got on the one side of the market, if you will, we can call it a market of data rights or a network of exchange of rights, let's say. You've got these authorized agents operating on behalf of consumers, and you've got these DSR providers, sort of like some of the services and products that Wirewheel provides. So they operate in a sense on behalf of businesses who are seeking to comply with the law. So where this protocol fits in is in an attempt to extend and empower these companies who are doing largely B2B data exchanges, with the thinking that we don't want to compete on like a JSON format. We do want to compete on quality of products and services. So that's sort of just my little extension to what Jenny mentioned.
So we actually have a question. Wasn't there a recent ruling that advocacy groups can sue on behalf of consumers? Is that something does consumer rights fall into that category?
I'm not entirely familiar with the ruling that was mentioned, but Consumer Reports right now is not actively planning to sue on behalf of consumers. It's a potential future extension of the work we're doing, but really our focus is about how can we make sure that when a consumer wants to manage their data with a company, they're able to do so in a more frictionless fashion. And then also how can we make sure that on the company side, the requests are received in a format and with all of the necessary components such that they're able to be processed.
So it seems pretty clear to me the benefits of consumers. So it sounds like they can use your app, and for those who, and correct me if I'm not saying the right thing, they can use an authorized agent and fill it out once, and then that authorized agent can make many DSAR requests, with the protocol making it easier to make multiple DSAR requests. So that's a benefit to consumers. Talk to me about the benefits to companies. Ginny, if you want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a number of benefits to companies. So one is that companies are seeing more and more requests come in from authorized agents. So instead of seeing a request from a consumer directly, you're receiving a request from an intermediary. The data rights protocol specifies in pretty good detail exactly what the components of that request can be or will be, and also specifies how the agent and the company or the company via a DSAR provider are able to efficiently exchange information and get these requests processed. So from the company side, you save a lot of time of kind of going back to the consumer and needing to ask for this or that. You also have a lot more certainty that these requests are valid requests when they're coming in through valid agents, and we're also specifying an identity verification flow that will enable smoothness of processing the request for everyone involved. Daza, what else would you like to add on that?
Can we build on that? Because I know that is a big issue. We hear that a lot of the identity verification. Can you talk a little bit more about?
Absolutely.
About that?
Yeah, and so you're a mind reader, Judy, because that was exactly what I wanted to extrapolate on. And then I'll also add one thing that sort of was between the cracks in some of the stuff that Jenny said. But on the identity verification part, I don't know if the 63 people on here can all see the chat, but I added some bullet points on what the protocol does, and one of them says an agreement to support JWT identity tokens. So what on earth does that mean? So basically, that this is a another protocol that we're incorporating into the data rights protocol for encrypting these little tokens. Well, first of all, the protocol is called OpenID Connect. It's a more refined version of OAuth 2. Not sure what that is. And in it, there's a standard way to assert claims about identity of users, like name, email, address, etc. And so we're utilizing that structure and extending it, and encrypting it as part of the secure workflow, with more security enhanced by a eKYC kind of banking variation of OpenID Connect. And the basic business and legal logic here, because I mean, some of this is a technology question. All of it is not a technology question. So some of the other dimensions of this are that we can leverage the role of an authorized agent, okay, as part of the onboarding of consumers, and the verification of email and telephone number and some other identity attributes, as part of that verification kind of workflow, and can and that can be almost that can be wrapped in these secure tokens and sent along with the data requests to DSAR providers and back to covered businesses, and in a way where we think, and we're about to test, that this should be able to relieve some of the pressure of getting somewhat random, unstructured requests in. And the logic from the perspective of the consumer, of course, is that you can sort of identify and verify yourself a few times and almost amortize that across other systems. One other interesting thing is having a business with like a help desk and an agreed protocol under a kind of what we call a trust network umbrella, where you can call and ask questions and further some additional inquiries about verifying consumers or other questions. We think also helps to provide a solution for the kind of edge cases that all, I don't know if they're edge cases that always seem to come up when verifying consumers. Actually, I'll just leave my answer right there because of the length of the session, but there's a few other benefits to, okay, I'll say one thing without explaining it. We think that there may be brand equity benefits as well. So assuming that we're successful, remains to be seen in finishing this protocol and launching with a group of companies and more companies that are in the pipeline, and that it works well, okay, then there may be a kind of a benefit to being leaders, thought leaders, and innovators in action, to take privacy requirements and to bring them to the next level. There could be some branding associated with that, and there may even be regulatory benefits. So again, if we project something like this as successful, a regular design pattern for regulations such as the personal data regulations would be for government to provide a kind of safe harbor. So if there is a voluntary standards-based certifiable or measure, let's say like certifiable standard that companies were complying with, that met or exceeded the legal requirements, one could imagine a future amendment to a regulation or future statutes that indicated companies that are in such a consortium and can be shown with independent certification to be in conformance with the standard and its operation can be maybe deemed to be in compliance with the statute, or maybe a rebuttable presumption. So you'll see some of this kind of languages in Congress right now. The Republicans just had, there's another bill where they've got one of the pages such a safe harbor, but these safe harbors are all over the place, and electronic benefits transfer, all sorts of areas of law. It's sort of a common design pattern. So there may be, direct benefits of faster, cheaper, better by using standards, and there could be other business and legal benefits as well.
Great. So we have a couple of questions. The first one is about the authorized agent service. And the question is, how are you different than authorized agent services available in Europe today? What does your SID say about how companies will respond to receiving request from Consumer Reports or your application, which I don't know if you've shared it, Ginny, but there is a website, right, where people can go to see the app. And the person asked because their legal team has told them not to respond to people who are hired to provide these services. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Right. Yeah. So there are a few authorized agent services on the market in Europe right now. There are a few things that are different about these services. A lot of them are not operating as authorized agents as defined by CCPA and providing the sorts of proof that the CCPA asks for. So a lot of them are kind of representing consumers' data interests just through integrating with consumers' email and sending email as if they were the consumer, versus being a verified authorized agent under CCPA, in which you're providing documentation about your kind of proof of identity, that you've paid taxes, your ability to operate, et cetera. And then also the kind of verification standards for authorized agents under CCPA are higher, and those are standards that we have incorporated into the agent that we're bringing to market. And then as far as kind of responding to these requests from authorized agents and what we've seen there, we have done research within the digital lab about what it is like to serve as an authorized agent and how companies do respond to that. Really, I think a lot of companies haven't received a lot of authorized agent requests that they've needed to respond to. It's still a pretty young kind of nascent and young space. And so in that regard, we see a huge variety of types of responses to requests that come in through agents. In the chat in a little bit, I'll share a link to some of our research that we've published so far on what it's like to operate as an authorized agent sending opt-out requests under CCPA. And we're currently in the midst of a research study where we're sending data access requests under CCPA for consumers. So there is a real variety of responses. We're hopeful that initiatives like the data rights protocol that start to standardize the request response pattern with companies, and where we are kind of all aligning on identity verification and other parts of what's important here. We're hopeful that that is going to streamline things in the months and years ahead. The data rights protocol hasn't been deployed yet, so we're still too early to tell. But in the short term, we do see a variety of different sorts of responses from companies, and our agent will be prepared to deal with that. It's the same research team that has been sending these requests for consumers for over a year now is going to be powering the agent that we're bringing to the market.
Right. The next question, I think, Daza, this segues perfectly to, I think, a question. One of the reasons your team came today was to try to recruit people or anyone who is interested in working on the protocol or the project. And so the question is, how many first-party data companies have signed up to test this solution? So Daza, if you can answer that, and then also just let people know who's involved, how they get involved, etc.
By all means. And so I just typed, I clicked answer the question. I've never used this tool on Zoom before, so I hope that it worked. So I'll just go ahead and read it, into the record. So the companies that are currently in the, I guess I'd call it coalition at this phase, that are jointly developing this protocol, and not coincidentally who intend to implement and deploy it with each other, and to bring on, we hope, a great many more companies to help iterate this and deploy it over time, are Consumer Reports, of course, in the role of authorized agent, and Wirewheel in the role that we are currently calling privacy infrastructure provider, but commonly known as DSR provider. But it's a little more complex than that. We also have joining us in the role of authorized agents, Mine, who someone asked about in the chat, and Surfshark, based on they're a firewall provider, but they're bringing on board an authorized agent app. I think it's already in beta now, out in the app stores. And then in the role of covered business, there is Spokeo, right now, and they are carrying all the water for that role, and we're currently have in the pipeline other companies that are basically, you could think of these as companies that are not using services of a company such as Wirewheel to help them process data rights requests. They're sort of like roll your own. They've got their own systems. And so the protocol is intended to work for them as well. And of course, those break into, you could say, two categories from the way people talk about things in these circles. One of them is like a kind of a brand business, I don't know, like Walmart or whatever, GE, and the other could be like a data broker. Has definitely got everyone's attention, and arguably there's hundreds of different variations of companies, but the point is there's a category. There are companies that are required to comply with the law. And the protocol should provide a standard way that they can provide an interface in their systems to do so in a way that we hope will be a simple and rather relatively easy way to remain in compliance.
And we are looking for more covered businesses to come and join the Data Rights Protocol initiative right now. In the development process, we've arrived at the point where in the next weeks and months ahead, we're going to be ready to test the protocol we have in place. And so this is a really unique opportunity to be one of the kind of founding companies behind the protocol and to really shape its direction and ease of use. So if you think your company may be interested in participating in this consortium, we'd be delighted to hear from you. And datarightsprotocol.org is a great way to reach out to us.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've come to the end of our half hour. Ginny and Daza, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this really important work for consumers. It was great to hear all about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks, everybody.
Hand it back over to
everyone for joining. And please be sure to join our next session. We are delighted to have you with us today. And our next session is up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Pacific Time, Privacy Assurance, Establishing a Second Line of Defense to Sustain Compliance. Look forward to you. It's going to be another great one. Thank you.